In this lesson, we begin our look at plan phase, and the system request kicks off plan phase within the system's development lifecycle. After this video, you'll be able to describe the purpose of a system request as well as its context within the system's development lifecycle. You'll also be able to determine when and when not to produce a system request, as well as list the important dimensions of a system request. System request is one of several deliverables that we do during plan phase. Other deliverables we will take a look at during other videos as part of this lesson, such as analyzing feasibility and developing a project plan. I encourage you, as we look at all of the deliverables through the various phases of the system's development lifecycle, to use the deliverables judiciously. What I mean by this is we don't just take essentially a formula or a recipe and produce these deliverables every time we work through the system's development lifecycle. Instead, what we do is we take a critical look at the project and determine whether each deliverable might add value and clarity to the current task. So in this case, we'd only produce a system request if we felt like there was value in doing so. And obviously, the value that's provided will change depending on the context of and the culture of your organization, all of which are things that we'll look at through the balance of this course. The system request is a general name for any document or system used to initiate the system's development lifecycle process. Now, few organizations actually use the term system request. Instead, you might have something like a system proposal document or other system initiation document. Methods range from simple, such as a spreadsheet where we might keep a list of all of the system requests that we've had, up to very complex systems that use a formal submission and review process for new systems. This is an example, this is a list of the items that you might find in a typical system request. We start with the project sponsor. This is a person, not a role, but a specific person that has a name. This is a sponsor of the project. The business need articulates the business-related needs of the system. This is different from the functions of the system that it might do, such as automating purchasing or so on. Instead, it talks about the business need, which might be something like to reduce the number of days between invoicing and payment. Business requirements are the requirements that the system must meet in order to be determined or to become successful, I should say. This means that, for example, if the system needs to be delivered at a certain price point or it needs to be delivered by a certain date, these would be important business requirements to list as part of the system request document. The business value is essentially how the system is going to pay for itself. It's probably obvious that information systems cost money to develop, and so in order to justify the investment of this money, we need to get that back at some point in the project. This might be by speeding up a particular process. It might be by increasing our sales revenue, for example, by providing an additional sales channel, or it could be savings through reduced need for staff. We'll take a look at analyzing financial feasibility in a future video. And then finally, special issues or constraints that might be relevant to the system. So for example, if the system needs to be in place by a certain deadline to meet government requirements, that would need to be listed here. In a retail organization, such as a Best Buy or a Target, for example, oftentimes systems need to be in place in time for the holiday shopping season in order to kind of justify the investment in these systems. And so you'd list these in the additional constraints area. This is an example of a system request filled out for a hypothetical information systems project that is similar to iTunes, so an online music store. At the top we have our project sponsor, and again these are typically a named individual and not just a generic role such as vice president. Our business need, our business requirements, these are the functions that the system must perform in order to be considered successful, and then the business value. This is typically where we would list any increase in sales or reduced need for staff that might occur as part of the implementation of the system. And finally, the special issues or constraints. That wraps up our discussion of the system request. In future videos, we'll take a look at analyzing feasibility, selecting your project, and developing your project plan. Before cooking a meal at home, you might want to do a few basic things to make sure that the meal will be successful. you might want to take inventory of the ingredients you have in the kitchen, as well as self-assess your own skills and ability to cook that meal. So it is with information systems. In information systems, we call this a feasibility analysis, and we're going to cover feasibility analysis in this video as well as the next video. After this video, you'll be able to describe the 3 dimensions of a typical feasibility analysis, identify the primary considerations for technical feasibility, and 3 types of project financial benefits and which is most important. Finally, we'll end talking about total cost of ownership and its relationship to economic feasibility. The next video will cover the 3rd dimension of feasibility analysis, which is organizational feasibility. A feasibility analysis examines the feasibility of a particular project, just as we examine the feasibility of cooking our meal in the kitchen. We typically break down the concept of feasibility into 3 dimensions. The first is, can we build it? And this is called technical feasibility. Essentially, we look at our organization and whether or not we have the skills and the tools required to build the system. Next, we look at economic feasibility, which answers the question of, should we build it? This is kind of looking at it and say, well, is this a good idea from a financial or economic standpoint? And we have a few tools that we can employ to get the answer to this question. Finally, we look at, if we build it, will people use it? And this is referred to as organizational feasibility. We'll take an in-depth look at this in the next video. The process of doing the feasibility analysis is often more important than the final format itself. In this case, the journey is its own reward, so to speak. It's not so much that there's a prescribed format for doing your feasibility analysis as it is that at some point in the project, usually early on in plan phase, that you take some time to look at the feasibility of the project and report that back in a format that is appropriate for your organization and its culture. We start by looking at technical feasibility, which answers the question of, can we build the system? This addresses the organization's technical readiness to take on the project. Some things that we might want to consider when analyzing our technical feasibility would be things like our familiarity with the business application, familiarity with the technology being proposed to implement the system, the project size, as well as any integration requirements. Integration requirements often increase the complexity of a project by orders of magnitude. For example, if we are a small U.S. university and we wanted to open a ticket office, that ticket office might have a requirement to process credit cards. We would want to look at if the organization is currently processing credit cards in any other systems and whether or not that's a capability that we have or a responsibility that we want to sign up for. These are the kinds of things you would look at in a technical feasibility analysis. Inexperienced professionals often state the technical aspects of technical feasibility too clearly. We often think that the system is simpler than it will eventually be. And we also tend to, when we're inexperienced, follow the recipe exactly for technical feasibility. One of the interesting things about information systems is that each project is unique. Unlike building houses in a subdivision, for example, every information systems project is new and has new challenges associated with it. And so it's not a case of one size fits all. While technical feasibility is often a kind of a whiteboard type of analysis, economic feasibility actually has some math and some calculations to it. This examines whether it makes financial sense to proceed with a proposed improvement project. Now, many systems analysts might think, this is not my job. This is the job of the business people. But I would argue that as information systems professionals, we have a responsibility to know and understand the financial benefits that the system is expected to provide. Costs are relatively easy to understand. We often get these by asking our team for estimates of how long it will take them to develop a certain part of the system. And in the case of buying a commercial off-the-shelf system, often the vendor can give us a price list and other things. So the costs themselves are relatively easy to understand. Benefits, on the other hand, are much more nuanced. We break those down into tangible benefits, and within the category of tangible benefits, we have hard benefits and soft benefits. Intangible benefits are things like brand recognition and corporate social responsibility or corporate image. We'll talk about the role that those play in our feasibility analysis. Similar to technical feasibility, inexperienced professionals often make a few mistakes when doing financial feasibility analysis. Many times we rely solely on intangible benefits, such as increased brand recognition, to justify a system. And while these are important to note and to state, they are rarely enough in and of themselves to justify the enormous investment in new information systems. And then we often don't understand the difference between hard tangible and soft tangible benefits. And so we'll start with those. First, we look at the general category of tangible benefits to a system. These are generally benefits that can be measured with a number. In particular, they can be measured with a dollar figure. Typical examples might be a reduction in cost from improving the efficiency of a process, or an increase in revenue from additional sales, perhaps opening up an additional sales channel, for example. In general, we tend to prefer growth projects over cost-saving projects. So a project that results in a $1 million increase in revenue might be preferable to a project that saves $1 million in cost. Some of this relies on the kind of cultural values of the organization, but in general, we prefer growth projects to cost reduction projects. You can put a dollar figure on all tangible benefits, and they generally impact the overall cash flow of a project. Hard tangible benefits impact the project cash flow or the company P&L directly. That means that you will see the impact of the project on the company's P&L statement or on the project cash flow. And we'll look at a few examples of project cash flows. Soft tangible benefits, on the other hand, can still be measured with a number, such as a dollar figure, but they don't impact the cash flow or the P&L. Examples of these might be things like freeing up warehouse space. You can attach a dollar figure per square foot to that warehouse space, but freeing up that warehouse space doesn't necessarily impact your P&L, just allows you to store other material there that you would otherwise have to store in another place. Another example might be saving time from saving the time of salaried employees. Again, you don't get to save that money. It doesn't flow through to the bottom line, but you can then reassign that employee to other tasks that might be considered more productive. Intangible benefits, on the other hand, we cannot generally measure with a dollar figure. These would be things like brand recognition, corporate image, or the job satisfaction of our employees. We often want to state the intangible benefits when justifying the project because they are important. Increased corporate brand recognition or job satisfaction are very important, but they're harder to measure, and so we often can't solely justify investment based on these items. So we'll mention them, but these do not impact the project cash flow or the company P&L. Let's look at a few examples of cash flows that we might use when determining whether or not we should build a system. It's important that we use a discounted cash flow projection because money that we save in the future years is not worth as much as money that we might save today. Similarly, costs of the system, which tend to be front-loaded in our projects, cost us more in the present than they will in the future. And so at the top here, you have an example of a simple cash flow that does not use a discount rate. In this cash flow, costs are provided in nominal dollars, and you can see at the end on the far right of the top cash flow, we have total net benefits of $14,000. When we work in discounting with the exact same set of numbers, you can see that the benefits as well as the costs in future years are not quite worth quite as much as they might otherwise be. And then this gives us a net benefit of around $6,000. So you can see the two calculations result in a slightly different answer as to the NPV, or the net present value, of this particular system. This is just a more kind of comprehensive example of all the costs that we might want to account for in a project cash flow. I will let you study this on your own, but just to say this is an example of that includes more costs than just the simple examples we looked at in the previous slide. I'm going to end by talking about the concept of total cost of ownership, which is really the ultimate metric in economic feasibility and something that is on the minds of many CIOs today. Total cost of ownership, otherwise referred to as TCO, refers to the entire cost of building, maintaining, and eventually retiring a software system. According to Gartner, the initial project cost is only 8% of the total cost of ownership, and this is with an average information system lifespan of about 15 years. Every $1 you spend developing and implementing the system in the initial phases is followed up with 77 cents per year in maintenance and support of the system. So it's very important that we consider the whole picture. This amounts to about $12.50 in total cost of ownership for each $1 of initial project cost. Consider the implications of this. A $10 million system with $5 million in hard benefits annually, if we don't consider the total cost of ownership of this system, we get a very attractive return on investment of 70%. However, if we use these averages for total cost of ownership, you can see the return on investment comes down to 1%, and the decision to invest in this is probably marginal at best. This video covered technical feasibility as well as economic feasibility. In the next video, we'll take a look at the third dimension of our feasibility analysis, which is organizational feasibility, which answers the question, if we build this system, will people actually use it? In the late 1990s, Dr. Spencer Johnson released a book entitled Who Moved My Cheese? The book was about dealing with change in the workplace. It was about mice and humans and their hunt for cheese and what happened one day when the cheese was moved, impacting the lifestyle of both of those groups. So it is with information systems. Information systems also often represent change to various constituencies in the organization, and dealing with this change is often one of the most important aspects of a successful implementation. In this video, we'll examine the third dimension of feasibility, which is the concept of organizational feasibility. After this video, you'll be able to describe the concept of organizational feasibility. You'll be able to define a term that we're calling organizational readiness and its relationship to organizational feasibility. And you'll be able to list some strategies for enhancing organizational feasibility, as well as enhancing the chances that the information system is accepted by those who are intended to benefit. Just as a reminder, we're talking about feasibility analysis in plan phase. In the previous video, we looked at technical feasibility as well as economic feasibility. In this video, we'll spend a little bit of extra time on the concept of organizational feasibility, which essentially answers the question, if we build it, will people use it? And just a reminder that the process of doing the feasibility analysis is often more important than the final format. So we're not prescribing a particular document or template here, but rather encouraging you to go through the process of thinking of each of these dimensions and presenting it in a format that's appropriate for your organizational context. Organizational feasibility examines whether or not the organization is ready for the improved system or process. Now, most of the time, it's not whether users will resist the system, but it's more about identifying who will resist the new system, because new information systems inevitably will impact some groups in a perceived negative way, and that will need to be managed. Inexperienced information systems professionals might assume that everyone will be happy with the new change. And so it's important that we examine support from top down, such as whether or not our senior management supports the change, as well as support from the bottom up. And this is whether or not users are excited about the new system. Many systems have tremendous support from top management, but are resisted at the grassroots level. On the other hand, other types of systems and changes are initiated from the grassroots level and are difficult to sell to upper management because the value of the systems might not be obvious. This is an example of how organizational feasibility can often be overlooked. This example is from the textbook on which we base this course, and you can see in the box that's highlighted in red here, from an organizational perspective, the project is low risk. If you continue to read through this paragraph, you'll see that we are assuming that everyone will be happy with the new system. This is almost never going to be the case, and so I encourage you to think instead not about whether someone will be unhappy, but to identify the constituency that might be negatively impacted by a new system. Many new information systems represent process improvements or efficiencies that might result in reduced work for staff or reduced staffing levels, and often these people are the first to object to the new system. Enhancing organizational feasibility is all about leveraging your stakeholders. You have various stakeholders for a project, including the project champion. The project champion is the person who initiates and promotes the project. There are some very specific things that the project champion can do to enhance organizational feasibility, such as make a presentation about the objectives of the project and the proposed benefits, or create a prototype of the system to demonstrate its potential value. Organizational management often needs to be brought on board so that they continue to promote the system and allocate budget for it in some cases. It's important to make a presentation to them that clearly articulates the project and its proposed benefits. And of course, users often represent the largest constituency of people affected by any new system. So it's important to assign users official roles on the project team, get them involved as early as possible, assign them specific tasks, and get feedback from those users regularly. A lot of change organization seminars and change management seminars go into specific examples. Some things that come to mind off the top of my head are things like offering awards for people who use the new system the best or the most properly on a monthly basis, or other types of contests like that that get users engaged in the process of adopting the new system. We're going to talk not so much about organizational feasibility, but instead introduce the concept of organizational readiness. And I'll try to articulate the difference between the two. Organizational readiness was first defined, or explained, I should say, by Gartner. And you can see the article here on the screen that talks about going beyond change management into this concept of organizational readiness. Well, what are the differences between the two? Well, textbook approaches are typically quite narrow, and you can see this based on, and here's a great example. This is the simplified systems development lifecycle that we are using for this course. You'll notice that in amongst the phases here at the very end, we have ensure change is managed, as if it's some sort of afterthought. The concept of organizational readiness, on the other hand, talks about the things you should be doing at each phase in the systems development lifecycle in order to make sure that the chances for success in adoption are high when we get to the end of the project. Change management, which is typically a very, like I said, a narrow take on organizational readiness, you might find in typical textbook headings like this: preparing people for the new system, revising management policies, motivating adoption, using awards or contests like we talked about, and so on. So these are the typical things that you'd find in a textbook. On the other hand, if you study organizational readiness, the organizational readiness framework will give you activities that occur in each phase of your systems development lifecycle that are designed to ensure success in implementation down the road when you get to the end of your project. So with this, we wrap up our discussion of feasibility within plan phase. Selecting the project is often a management task, and so the last video in this lesson will cover developing the project plan, and that will wrap up our discussion of plan phase. We will wrap up this lesson by looking at the end of the plan phase, which is essentially creating the project plan. After this video, you'll be able to describe a work plan and its purpose on a process improvement project, define the project management triple constraint, identify and document project risks, as well as define challenges of managing communication, and finally describe the concept of a project critical path. All of these are related to creating a project plan. Now, obviously there are project management courses out there that you can take. The goal of this lesson is not to turn you into a project manager, but to give you basic awareness of the types of things that project managers deal with. We'll also talk about how project management skill sets are sometimes shared with the skill sets of the business analyst. We are currently in the plan phase. We are at the end of the plan phase, where we would typically create at least an initial draft of a project plan. Now, the project manager and the business analyst are different roles, but they often share skills. So much so to the point that many people who enter the workforce as business analysts often go on to a career as project managers, because they do share quite a few skills. However, they are different roles. The project management role focuses on developing the work plan, managing the triple constraint, managing risk, communication, and the critical path. And we'll cover each one of these in detail. Let's start with a work plan. When developing the work plan, you want to start by identifying the phases of your project and the deliverables. You would then create something called a work breakdown structure that you'll see abbreviated as WBS in the slides. We often then go to estimate the tasks, sometimes by contacting the people who will be asked to perform those tasks and asking them how long they think it will take. We then assign dependencies and people to these tasks. We do the project plan, or we create the project plan in this sequence, and the most popular tool out there for managing project plans is a tool called Microsoft Project. And this is what a simple project plan might look like in Microsoft Project. We can then explode out the various phases into more and more subtasks. All of these, this structure that you see on the screen right here is something called a work breakdown structure, again abbreviated as WBS. Here is another look at a work breakdown structure that comes from the textbook on which this course is based. You can see high-level tasks as well as some subtasks, and one important dimension of the project manager's work is to manage the dependencies of these tasks. So for example, if you look here at tasks number 10 and 11, those are both dependent on task number 9 being completed. If task number 9 goes over its allotted time, then these two tasks would also be impacted by that. The project manager's job is to keep on top of these changes and manage them. We identify the phases and deliverables. We then create our work breakdown structure. Then we estimate the tasks, again, often by asking people how long they think it will take. We create dependencies, which you see here is the predecessors column. And then finally, we assign tasks to people. And oftentimes, we do this in a tool like Microsoft Project. So that's creating the work plan. Another important concept that project managers, almost all project managers know, is something called the triple constraint. The triple constraint is the idea that we're balancing three things when we're managing projects. Now, the three things that we're balancing will change depending on which triple constraint you're looking at, but these are just a few examples. The classic one appears here in the middle, which is balancing cost, time, and scope. You can often see variants of this. On the far right, you see fast, good, and cheap. Pick any of the two, not three. And another visualization of it is project size, project cost, and project time. These are often represented as an equilateral triangle, the idea being that if you increase, for example, the scope of the project, then you need to rebalance the cost and the time required to complete that project. Another way that this is useful is you can constrain, for example, the time that you have to complete a project, and then you'll have to accept the scope and the cost as a function of the time you have to spend on the project. And so project managers will spend a lot of time managing these three things. And the triple constraint is one of the most useful tools I've found in my career when communicating with upper management about the impact of adding features or if they want to, for example, bring a project in for less cost or at a sooner date. Project manager is also taking a look at risk. Risks to the project is anything that might threaten the schedule of the project or the viability of the product once the project is complete. Here is an example of a system request for Pine Valley Furniture. We saw a system request in the early video. And so the question becomes, what are some of the risks that a project like this might encounter? It's tempting to list generic risks, like not enough top management support, our key people will leave, and so on. Every project that's ever happened faces these risks, and so listing them out is often not a value-added activity. Instead, we want the risk to be specific to the project. We don't have sophisticated forecasting skills at Pine Valley Furniture, and without this skill, we won't be able to gain benefits from the automation project. Or we will need to identify each SKU with color and style, and we don't have a consistent way to classify style today. Another example, these types of systems usually use Oracle or SQL databases. We will get training. However, the system might fail due to our lack of experience in these technologies. These are specific to the project. You also have an assigned reading that goes into risks and how to write them in much greater depth. For each risk, it's often not enough to list out the risk itself, but we also want to know what it is we're going to do about it. And so it's important, as you see at the bottom here, that we have a risk mitigation plan or something in place that's going to help us address the risk or minimize the opportunity for that risk to impact the project. One risk that every project faces is something that software professionals often call unkindly the truck factor. I've heard people propose renaming this to the lottery factor. The point is, how many people on your project need to be hit by a truck before they're in serious trouble? And again, you might reframe it in a positive sense as how many need to win the lottery and not show up for work tomorrow in order to put the project in serious trouble. But this is one risk that most projects will have to manage, and so you'll find a lot of articles out there on managing this type of risk. Another thing that project managers have to consider is the divisibility of tasks. So for example, let's say you've been assigned to pick a field of oranges. If one person can pick that field in 4 hours, you can often add a second person to that team, and they can pick the entire field in roughly half the time. You simply divide the field into 2 halves, and assuming that they're kind of equally skilled at picking oranges, they'll be done in about half the time. If we take that same scenario, though, and we put it in the context of a software project, and let's say you've been assigned to build a new order entry page. You estimate it'll take one consultant 1 month to build the page. How long will it take 2 consultants to build the same page? Well, the answer is actually not half the time. In fact, I'd say you'd be lucky if 2 consultants could get it done in the same amount of time. Most likely, it's actually going to take more than 1 month to build that page if you put 2 consultants on it. Now, why is this? And why is it important for project managers to understand? Fred Brooks wrote a book back in the 1970s called The Mythical Man Month, and I highly encourage you to read it. It's quite widely available, and maybe even give a copy to your manager if you work in an information systems discipline. But he introduced something called Brooks's Law that essentially states that adding developers to a late software project only makes it later. Why does this happen? Well, if we have a software project that's late and we dump a bunch of new people into the project, they're going to have some ramp-up time. They need to learn kind of how to operate on the project. Oftentimes, information systems tasks are not evenly divisible, like picking oranges in a field. And the final reason that Fred Brooks cites is communication. And let's look at communication and managing communication as the 4th of our 5 things that the project manager must do. Managing communication and the overhead associated with it grows at an exponential rate. So you can see here that a 2-person team essentially only has 1 line of communication. They just need to talk to each other. A 4-person team, on the other hand, has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different lines of communication between those 4 people. And you can see that grows exponentially as you add people to the team. So communication becomes an enormous overhead as the size of the team grows. And this is why oftentimes in information systems you hear a lot of stories about 2 people in their garage who are able to create kind of a unicorn type startup or something like that. It's because oftentimes working in a 2-person team is significantly easier than working in a larger team. The project manager's job is to manage that communication. Finally, let's take a look at the concept of a critical path, which is the last in our list of 5 jobs for the project manager. Within your work breakdown structure, the critical path is those tasks where if they go over time, the entire project will be over time. If you use a project management tool such as Microsoft Project, and you have your tasks as well as your dependencies and estimates all properly entered, Microsoft Project actually has the ability to highlight the critical path for you. These are the tasks that the project manager needs to focus his or her time on in order to make sure that the project comes in on time. Tasks that are not on the critical path, shortening them up might be a good thing, for example, because you can redeploy that resource to other tasks. However, it won't necessarily directly impact the overall length of the project. And so project managers will spend most of their time managing the critical path. That wraps up our discussion on basic project management principles and concepts that you might need to know as part of an information systems professional. Again, this is not intended to be a course on project management. However, these concepts are important for any information systems professional to know. In the next module, we'll be taking a look at, a much deeper look at, analysis phase and the types of deliverables that we, as information systems professionals, might have a more direct hand in creating.